What's up, everybody? We got a special guest today. Saint Javelin is joining us on the Rebel Road Show. Our signature cocktail will be all things Ukraine. We have the Zelensky, a popular drink from a Polish bar in the UK. It is blue curacao, vodka, simple syrup, brandy, lemon, and of course, ice. Rep the Ukraine for this one. To all my Ukes out there, Slava Ukraini, and enjoy the show. Welcome to the Rebel Road Show.
How many tulips is too many tulips?
We're talking with people making money off the beaten path. Let's kick it over to Madeline, who's got some drinks for us.
Tequila, gin.
Oh, and I'm getting paid for this too? Dope.
Every shoot's almost Fyre Fest, right? We're a picture of a sandwich away from just being canceled. Every shoot. Cheers. I've been really excited for this one. Joining me on the Rebel Road Show is Christian Borys, the creator and founder of Saint Javelin. He is the meme of war. He has raised over $1 million to help Ukrainians in need after the Russian invasion with his brand Saint Javelin. And he is a testament to what this podcast is all about. So Christian, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot for having me, man.
You've made a major impact and inspired a bunch of Ukrainians abroad by popularizing some of the war stories through merch. But did you ever think when you created the symbol of Saint Javelin that it would elicit the response that it did around the world?
No, not even close. It was all a complete accident. I didn't even create the symbol. The symbol existed already. So I basically just took something and popularized it, right? Like that symbol was originally, it was an artwork by a guy named Chris Shaw, an American guy from California, who specialized in like propaganda posters. I just spoke to him a couple of days ago again, because we became buddies through all this. And then somebody took that art in, I think it was 2020, they created this symbol of the Mother Mary, but instead of the Kalashnikov in his original artwork, they replaced it with the javelin. And then that became this like very, very niche meme that people referred to as Saint Javelin, but it was incredibly niche. Like you were either a journalist who covered the war in Ukraine, or you were an analyst at Jane's or something like that, or you were in the military and had been to Ukraine, or maybe kind of like understood what Ukraine was asking from the American government. Those were the only people that were aware of this meme, right? So it already existed, and then 2022 it just took on a life of its own, basically.
Through the merch that you've been selling, and I'm sure you're getting donations as well, how much money have you raised and where is it going?
So we've donated, this is Canadian dollars, I think it's almost 1.3 million now. So the original $500,000 donation that we did was to a registered Canadian charity called Help Us Help, which their mandate since 1991 has been to work with Ukrainian orphans. The initial goal was, can I get like $500 into the hands of Help Us Help? And then people just latched onto it because we existed before the war started. So in the lead up, there was so much news about, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Is Russia actually crazy enough to do this? And the day that they actually, launched their full scale invasion, Saint Javelin just kind of became this huge viral thing around the world.
The months-long build-up of Russian troops on the border with Ukraine has turned now into an invasion.
People wanted to show that they support Ukraine. It wasn't just about giving a donation. They wanted to literally wear it. They wanted to put it on their car, or whatever, right? They wanted to tell people, I support the good side in this, because there was such a binary decision between good and evil in this. So I think that's why, I think that's part of why Saint Javelin, became so popular so quickly.
Well, it's this like interesting cross section right now where social media is meeting like a major conflict, and there's phones in the, battlefield, and there's videos and unprecedented footage that we've never seen before. I found you almost a couple days after the invasion, and that's where I was getting a lot of, these videos that weren't showing up on CNN, that I don't know where you're curating all of this from, but it was like you couldn't take your eyes off of it.
Oh my God, I'm alive.
It was horrific. It was inspirational. It was a whole litany of things.
So I used to be a journalist. I lived there and I worked there, and that war was my life from 2014 to 2018. But I was just positioned very uniquely. Like, I used to work at Shopify before I was a journalist, so I understood e-commerce, right? So I don't think there was another person that would understand this war specifically so deeply, and then also the e-commerce side to be able to like launch something so quickly, right? The reason why, the motivation, was because those were my friends there. And when the war started, like literally the day that they invaded, I broke down watching Putin say that he was going to do his special operation, because those were my friends. And I thought, like most other people, that the Russian military was just going to roll over Ukraine. And I thought that they were going to fly jets into Kyiv and they were going to bomb everything, and that they were just going to do what they did in Chechnya, what they did in Syria, what they did in Georgia. Thank God that the Ukrainians, held their own. And I think basically what happened is they held their own long enough for the world to be like, let's support these guys, right? A multitude of factors led to that, but yeah, my motivation was that I lived there. That was my second home, and for me, watching it here and I felt like I should be there, right? Not fighting. I'm not a soldier, but I felt like I should be there, and this was the thing that I could do, was to basically filter out the bullshit for people. So that's what I started doing by starting an Instagram account, so I could document everything that's happening, not for myself, but also to show people and explain and like differentiate the reality. Because from my experience in 2014 to 2018, when I was there, it was Russian disinformation all the time, right? The whole time you were battling their narrative so much. Now nobody gives a shit about their narrative, which is beautiful for me to see, because like finally people see that state for what it is and that government for what it is. They just lie and lie and lie repeatedly. And unfortunately, sometimes you still see like Reuters or whoever print headlines that say, Russian officials say whatever. But the reality of that is that they're just lying all the time.
Putin says he's only targeting military targets.
Bullshit. Sorry.
Right. So really, I wanted to show my perspective on the truth and what was actually happening in Ukraine.
So you're in a unique position just because you were embedded over there. So you had already followed a lot of social media accounts of Ukrainian citizens.
Yeah. And I had a lot of friends in group chats and stuff like that were just constantly analyzing, like by the minute. Our group chats were just flooded. And, the people in these group chats are highly qualified. Like their whole career is based on understanding war, right? So that information was just flooding in like crazy, and I was just taking that information and I guess making it palatable for a general audience who doesn't understand, the difference between like a BTR and a BMP or something like that. Just making it more, and then eventually I just added my own, funny twists to things, I guess, and it became like almost like a troll account, basically.
Не так. Welcome to Ukraine, сука!
Yeah, your feed is interesting because it takes you through a huge range of emotions, right? So I have been exposed to the devastation at Mariupol, and again, then there'd be a meme that makes me laugh, and it's an interesting dichotomy because it's hard not to cry, but it's also like hard not to take that journey with you, cheering on, tanks being blown up and men dying. It's like this weird memification of war that God knows what the impact of that is. I hope it drove awareness, but I hope it's also not going to like desensitize people and make them move on back to the Kardashians. it's an interesting thing, and I hope the people in the West keep that same vigor that they need to support these men and women who are fighting for survival. I mean, this is crazy.
Yeah, I think what we've realized is that there's a core audience of people who do care on a daily basis, and then there's a much larger audience of people that you can bring in periodically. But I think the reality of war is that people, especially when they're not there, they're not living through it, right? If you're living here, you're so far away from the reality of the war that you just forget about it. Even if you're, you really, really genuinely care, you just can't care all the time, especially it's 6 months on, right? And the Russians kind of count on that too. They've even said it, that they think that the Americans and the West will eventually stop caring. And that's kind of their long-term plan, right? To wait it out, I guess. I think our job really is like, how do we keep this thing sustainable that we've built and keep people engaged and interested? So it's a difficult thing, but I think we've done a pretty damn good job of it so far.
No, you're doing a phenomenal job, and I commend you for it. I give a lot of credit to, the Ukrainians holding their ground, and Zelensky in particular, because, he's been this action hero. I mean, there's like certain quotes that will stand the test of time. I mean, it's a leader in history now, and it's been amazing to see.
Yeah, he's Winston Churchill. He's basically modern Winston Churchill, right? He's a guy who had this thrust onto him, and he's playing the role of a lifetime. And I think he's done an unbelievable job. I can't picture another person, another Ukrainian leader that could have done that job that well. His job was to galvanize the world and say, we need everybody's help or else we will not survive. And he did exactly that. And he's done a remarkable job. Like I was there for a long time. The West never really supported Ukraine militarily, financially, somewhat, whatever. The sanctions were mediocre. Now, the things that Ukraine has gotten militarily, it blows my mind. Like, for somebody who spent time there and saw these guys fighting with, nothing, with very, very shitty equipment. Now the fact that they have they don't have the most advanced things, but they have way more than they ever probably could have imagined, right? And they have enough that they've been able to repel the advance, and now they're planning for counteroffensive. Somebody the other day mentioned that when they sunk the Moskva, that Russian battleship, that was probably the greatest military engineering feat of the 21st century, because they hit a moving target, like a tiny moving target that was hundreds of kilometers off land, and they hit the precise point on the ship that they needed to hit in order to make sure that it sank. It's genuinely unbelievable what the Ukrainians have done. And it really comes back to Zelensky being able to say to everybody, look, if you don't help us, we're done. This country doesn't exist anymore, right? I'm dead. My family's dead. They were in Kyiv. They were trying to kill him, right? It's really not hyperbole. It is genuinely an unbelievable thing that they were able to do.
And people are forgetting they're getting these advanced weapon systems. They don't have training on them. They're training on the fly and figuring it out. And they're still outmatched, but just their will and the sheer knowledge of the terrain and just the spirit of wanting to take this fight to regain their land is driving this force that hopefully pushes Russia back. I don't know how this thing ends, but hopefully the sanctions will do something, and the HIMARS blowing up weapons depots will just pause them enough that some land can get taken back. I saw Crimea just got its first direct hit from the Ukrainians to a major Air Force base, correct?
Yeah. That moment, to put it in context, the Ukrainians have waited for that moment for 8 years. That day was so important symbolically because there's a lot of people that had to leave Crimea. They left their homes behind. They left their families behind. I had a bunch of friends who were from Crimea had to move to Kyiv, and they told me stories about, you know, it's not just leaving your home, but also, for example, one of my friends, her mother was pro-Russian, so she stayed, and then the divide between them as this girl moved to Kyiv and she was she wanted to be, she was Ukrainian, she wanted to be part of Ukraine, and then the conversations with her mom became so difficult that their relationship just broke up. So it's not just losing your home, but it's also you lose your family, right? A lot of people are going through that now. So that moment yesterday of seeing that they could hit the Russians in Crimea, and now you have all these Russian tourists flooding out. The highways are full. The traffic is crazy to try to get out of Crimea, because now they've inflicted that same fear that Ukrainians have had for 8 years. They've inflicted that fear back on them. So it's basically like Ukrainians are overjoyed that now they have to feel the same thing that they've been feeling for 8 years. And now it's like, how do you like it, right? Maybe you understand where we're coming from now.
Как здесь классно, вот здесь как в своем доме жили, настолько все душевно, по-домашнему.
When the history of this war is written, that day will be an incredibly important day.
By having this fight that's, you know, lasted more than 3 days, and now here we are 6 months later, is this notion that most Ukrainians want to be Russian. Obviously, that's not the case, because they're taking it to you.
Yeah, no, it's always been, there was always a portion of the population that were they were either pro-Russian or that they were fine. Even after the war in 2014 started, they were still fine with being in Russia's orbit, let's say. And I'll give you an example. So a friend of mine, his dad, they're from Donetsk, which was the town that now is part of the People's Republic, so-called People's Republic. When the war started, him and his family, they moved to Kyiv. So his dad was still pretty pro-Russian, even though he lived in Kyiv. He had to flee war, he had to flee his home, whatever. Now, when the full-scale invasion happened, he became the most pro-Ukrainian. My friend told me that his dad was out at the block posts, the checkpoints. He became part of the territorial defense because he felt so betrayed by this country that he thought was part of his, you know, it was a brother nation, sister nation, whatever, right? And he couldn't believe what they were doing. So there definitely was an element that was sympathetic to Russia. But I think most of those people now, by and large, 99.9% of them have basically just said, I can't believe you did that. And no, this is our country. We're Ukrainian. Fuck off, right? We're going to make sure that you have nothing to do with this country.
Now, you took a trip to Ukraine, is that correct?
Yeah, I went twice.
Since the invasion?
Yeah.
So at what point did you make that first trip, and what was the mission of that trip?
So I went to Poland almost right away. My dad lives in Przemyśl, Poland, which is the border town that literally millions of refugees had to flood through from Ukraine, because that town is, when you cross the border, that's the train station that you go to. That's the, you know, the border that you drive through, whatever, right? So he lives there. He's Ukrainian, but he lives in Poland. He lived in Canada for 20 years, moved back. I've been to that town dozens of times. I've crossed that border on foot dozens of times before. So I was asked to go in March, almost right after the invasion started. I think I left like March 3rd or something, to help some people coordinate logistics for how do we get things into Ukraine. I speak Polish, so I could, you know, help them out that way and stuff like that. So I was there almost immediately, and then I flew back to Canada after 3 weeks, I think, and then I went back a couple weeks later, and I went directly to Kyiv. I went to Lviv first, and then I went to Kyiv.
What devastation did you see on the ground there?
It was the most horrific devastation I've ever seen in my life. And again, not to hammer this home too much, but I spent 4 or 5 years there covering that war. And the things that they did now since February the stuff that they did in 2014 pales in comparison. They, I saw buildings that you take a 20-story apartment building, they drop bombs from airplanes on it. So before, it used to just be an artillery war, right? You shell apartments. If you shell an apartment, if a shell goes through the window, the apartment's destroyed. But that unit is destroyed. This time, if you send a bomb from an airplane, the whole fucking building is destroyed, right? So literally, you had apartment buildings, 20 stories, 15 stories, whatever, that were sliced in half. So you only had 2 narrow strips remaining, and the whole middle of it was gone, right? Or the whole building was gone. It was hard to understand the scale that they attacked at. Genuinely, like, whole towns were just crushed. And I didn't even, I can't go to Mariupol and see what they did there, but you can see the pictures. It's apocalyptic. That's the only way to put it.
It's the worst
right?
thing I've ever seen. It seems like it's out of a movie. It's not even real.
It's Syria. What they did in Syria was they just decimated towns completely, right? And I never, ever, ever thought that could happen to Ukraine, but that's literally what they did to Mariupol and many, many towns in eastern Ukraine. It's so many of the towns that they've destroyed, they don't even get talked about because, the news cycle's moved on and whatever, but there's tons of towns that they've literally leveled to the ground, and almost nothing remains. Nothing is usable. The whole thing has to be rebuilt, right? So the devastation is just, it's apocalyptic.
And what kind of Russian propaganda is going, on inside their walls around a city like Mariupol?
So I remember when they finally officially took Mariupol, and then they sent in a truck, like a loudspeaker truck, a megaphone truck, whatever, a massive thing with speakers, and they started blasting propaganda about how it was the Azov Nazis and the Ukrainian Nazis who caused all this damage to these people that they had just besieged for months. It's unbelievable to me that they do that, and it's very hard for people to understand why anybody would still remain in a city like Mariupol as it's being bombed and all that. And basically, you look at one big reason is because people didn't want to go through filtration camps. They didn't trust that if they gave themselves to whoever was organizing the evacuations, that they would get out alive. They were more comfortable just sitting in their basement and hoping that there was going to be a change that would allow them to get out, right? Also, some people just have nowhere to go, or they don't want to leave. A lot of older people just say, no, this is my home. Where else am I going to go? They're old. They feel incapacitated, whatever. They don't go anywhere. So, it's hard for people to understand that sometimes, but it really is. People just don't have anywhere else to go.
So people are coming saying, we're going to evacuate you out, and then you don't know it, but you're on a bus to Russia.
Yeah, literally. I mean,
and how many people do you think have been from Mariupol, for example, have been evacuated and in some filtration camp?
I think there was a number published recently that it's in the multiple millions. It's 3 or 4 million Ukrainians have been put through Russian filtration camps. There was a story by a buddy of mine in the New York Times the other day that tracked how one family was taken from Ukraine. I think they were taken from Mariupol and then taken all the way to the far east of Russia, which is like, I think it's 10 time zones. And basically what happens is you're taken to a filtration camp, and then you're cycled through different filtration camps. You're sent from, you cross the border, you're sent to one place, and you're taken to another place, you're taken to another place, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And then they eventually were shipped all the way east. And then I think that they were able to get some family help or something like that to get them back to Western Russia, and then they were able to get over the border to Estonia. So now they're, now they're safe. But there's millions of people like that. And your question about the propaganda, it's amazing to me to see it failing, because it was so successful before. Russian propaganda had this effect on the West where people really thought that it was a Ukrainian civil war, that, you know, Russia really did have, you know, a say in Ukraine's affairs, that Ukraine shouldn't join NATO, that this really was all about NATO. And now what you've seen is that Russian propaganda has completely failed. People don't believe them at all anymore. Whenever they, you know, issue one of their statements or whatever, people just throw it aside. And I think it genuinely has been one of the most important effects of the war, because people support Ukraine so strongly now because they see the reality of it, right? It has been a Russian war since 2014. They have been lying since 2014. They did shoot down an airliner that killed hundreds of innocent civilians. They did do all of those things. They've just lied about it relentlessly.
It seems like they still have squashed some dissent within their own borders. Do you have any, you know, connects inside Russia where you get a sense of what the feeling is and sentiment is between the civilians there looking back at Ukraine? And
honestly, no. I the people I know left, and basically what I know about it is what I read about it, or, you know, what I watch. And there was a report the other day that said like 65% of people support the war. I don't know if any of those numbers are real, right? Because if somebody goes to you and asks, do you support the war? And if you say no, you're fucking shipped off to a prison camp. What are you going to say, right? I have no idea what the reality is inside that country. I obviously, like, I'm in Toronto. I saw, for the first time in my life, I was driving on the highway and I saw a guy in a pickup truck with a giant Soviet flag driving down the highway. Never seen that before in my life. To me, if you're here and you have all the access to free information, freedom of the press, all that, you can get an accurate assessment of what's actually the truth, right? There, you're just brainwashed wholeheartedly. If you're here, there's zero excuse for you to be supporting the war. You're a horrific person, right? It's akin to supporting the Nazis in World War II. If you're there and you're just watching television and your only source of news is Russian news media, I don't know how you could have any other opinion realistically, because you're so thoroughly brainwashed, right? If you watch some of the stuff that they say on TV, it's a parallel universe compared to what is actually going on. So
occasionally it seems that a slither of truth comes out on one of their nightly shows, but I'm sure that's, 15 seconds of truth in a sea of lies.
And it could also be orchestrated for alternative purposes when they do those things. So I could never forgive the people here who support the Russian regime. And there's obviously tons of people there that do support it, but I'm sure that there's tons of people there as well that think the war is horrific, that have lost family members in this war already, and they don't feel like they can speak up because they're scared of being imprisoned or whatever. But at the same time, you going to prison, look at what the Ukrainians face, right? The Ukrainians have been attacked every single day since February 24th. It's I don't know how many people have died at this point, but it's relentless, and they still send cruise missiles. They still attack random cities in the middle of Ukraine, right? They basically made it so that no place is safe. So it's hard to be sympathetic to anybody in Russia right now.
Now, in the money you've raised, do you know what it's been able to purchase and what kind of impact it's had over there?
So the original goal was to give the money to these orphans, right? And it was going to help. So every $1,000 that we raised was going to put a orphan who had lost their father or a mother to war through a 1-year scholarship program. So every $1,000 was going to go to that. We hit $10,000, and I that was one of the most important moments for me, because I remember thinking it was just so surreal to be able to do that for 10 people, right? For 10 kids. And then we hit 30,000, and then the reality of the war became so, it became so real that we realized we had to stop that and start buying like IFAKs and stuff like that. IFAKs are first aid kits for soldiers, for volunteers, for civilians. So we started to do that. We bought thousands of those. We bought bulletproof vests. We bought helmets. Like I delivered a bulletproof vest. I delivered a helmet. I brought 3 duffel bags full of tourniquets, like 900 tourniquets, into the country. So we started doing all this medical aid. And then quite recently, we got asked to be in partnership with President Zelensky's United 24 platform. And their whole thing was, we need to buy drones for Ukraine. So we got asked if we would be part of that. So we evolved from, basically this was originally meant to support these kids who had lost their parents at war. And then it became, let's make sure that these people stay alive while they fight this war. And now it's, okay, well, let's actually help them win this war however we can. We can't buy weapons or anything like that. But what I think our money is most useful for is to make people's lives a little bit better. So we have still continued to support Help Us Help. They just had a summer camp for kids who have lost their parents since this full-scale invasion started. So we sponsored a week-long camp in the Ukrainian mountains where they were just able to go for a week and just be kids again, right? And then that stuff to me is important, because it's like, you can buy a lot of stuff, but to allow somebody to have a few moments where they forget about how something horrific that they've been through, I think that's very meaningful. And really, in the grand scheme of things, the money that we've raised is like peanuts compared to what's actually being spent, right? So if we can make people's lives a little bit better for moments, I think that's a very good way to spend our money.
Now, I saw that the Ministry of Defense presented Zelensky with your shirt. What was that, to see that kind of moment and see this journey kind of come full circle?
So basically what happened was, when I went in April, I met with Alexei Reznikov, who is the Minister of Defense, and I gave him a shirt, a Saint Javelin shirt for him, but I also had one made for the president. And I basically just said, like, hey, I would really appreciate it if you would also give this to the president. And I was just, never actually thought he would do it. And he said, yeah, for sure. I'm seeing him later today. I completely thought it was bullshit. I thought he was just going to forget about his shirt. He was going to pass it off to his assistant, whatever. And then a few hours later, he messaged me and said, hey, I just want you to know that the president has your shirt. And I was blown away, because first of all, this guy's messaging me. And second of all, I was like, what do you mean he has my shirt? And then minutes later, somebody from our team posted in our group chat, basically saying, holy shit. And they posted the TikTok that Zelensky's team had posted of Reznikov giving Zelensky the shirt, explaining Saint Javelin. And I got, like, my phone just lit up. I had tons and tons of messages, and we started to, Saint Javelin started to really kind of explode media wise and whatever from that. So it was genuinely surreal. But then, so I was in Kyiv, I was packing my bags because I was leaving on a train to go to Lviv that night. I had to be at the train station at 10 before curfew started. And I think it was 9:00. And I'm packing my stuff to get in the taxi. And then they bombed Kyiv very close to where I was. So 2 cruise missiles hit an apartment building very close to where I was. So I just heard, like, I'm packing my stuff. My balcony door is open, and I just hear, and I walk out on my balcony, look over at the guy on the left, and he's a journalist doing a live to camera. And he goes, did you hear that? And still not understanding completely what was going on. I said, yeah, I think so. And then as that conversation ended, we heard another missile hit, and those strikes were the first strikes in Kyiv in a few weeks, and they killed a journalist from Radio Free Liberty in that hit, and it was basically like it was a terror attack. It was meant to say there was no military target in that. It was basically just, hey, we can hit you wherever we want.
Right. You're never safe.
Yeah. And they had just hit train stations in eastern Ukraine kind of just before I got there, or sorry, while I was there. So being on the trains was pretty nerve-wracking, because you're never sure, right? And you go from, holy shit, the president's, we did this amazing thing by orchestrating this to get this in the hands of the president, and then the reality of where you are hits you, and you gotta get in a cab, get to the train station before curfew as well. So and at that time Kyiv was really a ghost town. Like, it was very, very, very quiet and eerie and depressing, and it was all just a very surreal day.
So in April, that's when the Russian military pulled back and they had kind of regrouped in the east. And what was the spirit like of Ukrainians then? And then when your second trip, has it changed at all?
Yeah. So that first trip, when I went to Kyiv, the very end of the trip was the first bit of spring. So you finally saw sun. And you finally saw some people starting to go outside. You saw some cafes reopening. Like, life was bit by bit returning to the city. Then when I went back in May, it was amazing, because especially in Western Ukraine, people were really returning back to normal life, but they were still, there were still curfews, there were still air raid sirens all the time. Whether or not people took it seriously when the air raid sirens came on, there's a lot of people just didn't take it seriously, right? A lot of people 4 months into war, they were like, I'm not going to the fucking basement again.
Right.
But the mood was, holy shit, we beat them, right? So many people left Kyiv because they expected that it was inevitable that the Russian military that everybody talked about as such a great military was going to come into Kyiv and crush the city, right? A lot of people stayed and were ready to give their lives to fight, but a lot of people left. And as those people started to come back, it was a feeling of like, holy shit, our homes are still there. We actually we've beat them. And I think one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of people in Kyiv and in Western Ukraine, they've never seen the reality of the war in Eastern Ukraine, right? So for them, this full-scale invasion was the first time that they really understood what war meant. Right. Because it is a huge country, you're talking about like massive territory. So yeah, so I think in general, the mood was just shock that they'd beat the Russians out of Kyiv.
Now, you were a journalist before this. You're hoping to help 10 children, say. You're not a graphic designer. You're not a clothing manufacturer. How did this come to be where you're like, I'm going to make this merch and sell it? I mean, it seems like a bit of a leap. And then how did it grow from there?
It's a huge leap. It was just figure shit out, just be resourceful, figure it out. I had my previous life, I worked at Shopify. Then I went into journalism. Then I started a marketing company. So I had like a unique skill set, I guess. And I knew that there was companies that would make merch for you, right? So all we had to do was basically come out with the designs. And then as the thing started growing, more people started wanting to help. So then we started, we actually went from volunteers to actually building a business out of it, hiring people. We have like 14 or 15 people now. And we have designers, we contract designers for things. We have a guy who just makes video memes now, and he's like world class. It's unbelievable how good he is. So we figured out how to make merch, and that actually the company that helps us make that merch, it basically works so that somebody orders on our site, we don't have to touch it. We don't have to inventory it or anything like that. It gets printed and it gets shipped out directly to the customer. I decided that in order to bring like the maximum economic benefit to Ukraine, I would complicate things for our team by trying to make things in Ukraine.
Amazing.
So it's amazing, but it's incredibly difficult. And somebody who's been doing merch for like 30 years told me I'm an idiot for trying to do this during wartime. But he was like, what if your factory gets bombed? And I was like, well, it's the reality. That's a possibility, right? But he was saying your supply chain could be fucked, whatever. You could throw it all away. But I thought it was very important that we try to make things in Ukraine. So at this point, we've made thousands of shirts in Ukraine. They're now being shirts will now be shipped over to our office in Toronto, and then from there they'll be fulfilled to people around the world. So we've had orders from 70 different countries, but the bulk of it comes from the US and from the EU. So we'll also be, if you're in the US or if you're in Canada, your order will come from Toronto. If you're in the EU, your order will come from Ukraine. But obviously, shipping from Ukraine right now is not the easiest thing to do. Right. So those kinds of things take time. But yeah, we also just did an art auction and sold art prints, and it's evolved from this sticker to all sorts of different things. I kind of think of it as like this weird cross between Patagonia and Supreme, where Patagonia's mission statement is we're in business to save the environment. So our mission statement, I just ripped it off basically because I love that. I love Patagonia and what it stands for, and that everything they do, they try to do for that goal, right? So our mission statement is we're in business to rebuild Ukraine. So all the things that we try to do is to bring in the most amount of cash that we can in order to give it to organizations that can serve that purpose, right? So whereas we do a lot of clothing in the way that Patagonia does, we also do kind of weird limited edition drops like Supreme does, right? Like this art, we'll be doing a bunch of stuff quite soon that'll be sort of in that Supreme style realm. So yeah, it's evolving. I still don't entirely know what it is that we have, but I don't know if we ever will. We just keep kind of trying to ride the wave and make it sustainable.
Well, I commend you for your efforts. It's amazing. I picked up the stickers right away for all my nieces and nephews, my extended family. Everybody got a Saint Javelin sticker. It was something that, like, you felt helpless at home, and you kind of provided an outlet to like grab onto something and have a material item to like show your support, and it definitely filled a void.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
This can't come without some danger, though, right? Like, were you sanctioned by Russia? Did I read that correctly? Are you the first memer to be sanctioned?
I was genuinely wondering that, because I have no idea if anybody's ever actually been banned from a country for like maybe from North Korea. Maybe, Franco and Seth Rogen are probably banned from North Korea for that movie that they made, but
for sure. I'm
just a regular dude, and it literally says on the sanction for creating the resource Saint Javelin. So I've asked, and I have no idea if anybody even knows if somebody has been sanctioned for something like that. But yeah, I'm not allowed to go anywhere near that country. So it was a very interesting day, because I woke up and I saw tons of messages from people screenshotting and sending me the link because they published their sanctions, right? And they said, hey, congratulations. And I was like, pretty surreal to know that you can't go into this giant country anymore, right? Not that I had any intention to, but to know that you're on their radar in that way is a very interesting thing as well, because now we have a store in Toronto, and I just keep waiting for the day somebody's going to throw a brick through the window. It is the reality of what we've done, and being so public about who I am and all that. I think it definitely comes with the risk. So it's something I keep in the back of my head, but like I can't let it run my life, right?
Right. You were born in Canada, correct?
Yep.
Are your roots Ukrainian?
Yeah. So both of my parents are born in Poland, but my dad is Ukrainian. So my dad was born in West Poland, but his family originates from southeast Poland, right along the border of Ukraine. And they were basically, they were ethnically Ukrainian, but they were essentially shipped out of that part of Ukraine and placed into Poland. And he didn't really identify with his Ukrainian. He wasn't allowed to speak Ukrainian growing up. It was not illegal, but you'd get like rocks thrown at you and stuff like that because of the, not disagreements, but there's so much tension between Ukrainians and Poles. So he didn't identify as Ukrainian really until he was in his teens, and then he went to Ukrainian high school and stuff like that. So he kind of learned his heritage. And my mom's just 100% Polish. So there was always tension in my family because he was very Ukrainian. My mom's side is very Polish, and there was all this, horrible history between the two sides. And now what's amazing to me is that Poland has been the best partner, probably the best partner for Ukraine through the whole thing. And being in Poland and seeing the support that Poles have given to Ukrainians, it's genuinely amazing, because I never, ever, ever thought that I would see that kind of unity.
Yeah, they've definitely been tremendously helpful. I mean, just being that bridge to all those refugees was incredible. My Ukraine story is like, I grew up in a very Ukrainian family in America, and like, my family was very entrenched in all the traditions and preserving the traditions. And I never really understood why it was so important. I wanted to like play baseball and just be as American as all the other kids in my class. This invasion, what it's brought is like all my cousins, messaging me saying, see, this is why we have borscht. This is why we go to Plas. This is why we go to Ukrainian school on Saturdays. It's because there is this historic oppressor that's trying to wipe out our heritage, and to see it unfold in my lifetime has kind of shifted my perception. I commend you and your dad for having this connection and you feeling this urge to do all these things for the people of Ukraine, because it's important work.
Yeah, for me, honestly, it wasn't even, it really wasn't even a sense of like being Ukrainian. It was just, those were my friends, and I wanted to do whatever I really didn't have a plan for it to be this big at all. When this thing started, I just thought about all my friends that were there, and I just couldn't wrap my head around all these people being killed. Because I remember, most people probably don't remember small details, but very early on, before the war even started, they were talking about Russian kill lists, right? Russia had these lists of people that they were going to kill, who were soldiers and journalists and blah, 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 all these kinds of people. And I knew people who were claimed to be on those lists, and they would have, if Russia had been able to do what it wanted to do, they would have wiped out so many of those people, right? So for me, it just stemmed from, I just wanted to do something to be a part of it and help in any sort of way I could. And it's good that now people understand that there is a huge difference between being Russian and being Ukrainian, and the cultural difference. And I don't think anybody's ever going to be like, oh, Russia, yeah, that's like Ukraine, oh, that's just Russia, right? I think that line has been drawn pretty well now.
Yeah, I mean, the bravery early on. I mean, there's so many historic stories that have come out at the beginning of the war. I mean, you've kind of documented all of it on your shirts and stickers. What are, like, you might have a better sense than anyone over what really caught on. What are some of the most memorable moments throughout this war that have been that inspiration and will be folklore going forward?
I think that Russian warship, go fuck yourself, that moment was the Ukrainians needed that guy to say that at that time, and to inspire them to fight. Morale is such a huge part of war, right? I think a big reason why the Russians, apart from incompetence, have been losing is because they had no reason to be there. The Ukrainians are fighting to the death for, I don't want to sound cliche or cheesy, but it really is for their freedom, for their survival. They know that if they don't win, they're either dead or imprisoned, or they live under an occupation. They have every reason to fight. The Russians have all those Russian soldiers who go there, conscripts, veterans, or sorry, contract, like the Wagner guys and stuff like that. They have no reason to be there apart from either money, or they've been basically just forced to go, right? They don't want to be there. So I think morale plays a huge part in it. And the Ukrainians, they've been able to use these moments like that Russian warship "Go fuck yourself" that went tremendously viral around the world, or Zelensky saying, I don't need a ride. Yeah, I don't need a ride. I need ammo. I don't need a ride, or whatever it was exactly. So
the sunflowers,
many,
that was a huge moment too.
Yeah, the sunflowers one was amazing.
Вы оккупанты, вы фашисты, вы пришли на нашу землю. Какого хера вы пришли с оружием к нам? Возьмите семечки, положите сырые, чтобы хоть подсолнухи росли, когда вы здесь ляжете.
Put these seeds in your pocket, so when you die, at least sunflowers will grow here. Basically, it's saying you're fertilizer, right?
Right.
That still is a huge meme.
You don't fuck with Ukrainian baptjas, man.
If there's one thing that I know, is never to mess with Mother Nature, mother-in-laws, or mother freaking Ukrainians.
yeah, and it really was like it needed to be her that said it. It needed to be that caricature of a Ukrainian babushka in the hustechka and everything, saying that in that moment. That it was perfect, right? And it inspired people to be like, fuck you guys, get off of our land. Like, what are you doing here, right? And I don't know, those moments just inspire people to understand what they're fighting for, I think. And it also, I think part of what is kind of maybe a precedent for this war is not social media, but the in-depth viewpoint you get of war because you know, all these soldiers have fucking their camera phones and they're posting TikToks and all this sort of stuff, right? And they're giving you a look at the dark humor that happens in war.
Русский корабль, иди нахуй.
So I'm not saying that they make light of war, but you do see that there are moments where they're very funny in the midst of all this horrific shit, right? And it's not just soldiers, but it's also civilians. And I think that people latched onto it. We definitely did, and people latched onto it, and it's a coping mechanism, right? So it's also very inspiring to know that you can laugh through all of this stuff. So yeah, the memes and all that, it just I don't know if there's ever been any conflict that is anything like this in terms of the memes and the humor.
Moving forward, where would you like to see Saint Javelin grow to be, or you're just riding the wave?
So actually this morning we talked about, we'll probably open a store in Kyiv relatively soon. We're going to do, so we have a bunch of people who work for Saint Javelin full time, and they live in Kyiv, they live in Ukraine and in different cities. So we'll probably open a store in Kyiv. We're going to do a pop-up in Kyiv in the next few weeks. And that'll kind of be like a testing ground for how much demand there is, because I genuinely have no idea, right? But I would love to have a store there. And in terms of growth, I have no idea. My only goal is to be sustainable. So if we can carve out a niche and serve our target market, our audience, with things that they continuously will want to buy from us that are valuable to them, then, you know, we can be a business that lasts and that gives back. And you know, we're not a registered charity or an NGO or a nonprofit or anything like that. So my philosophy is, we sell things that you want, and then we use that money however we want, right? With what I've seen from charities and all that, they're super struggling to get donations in because people just move on to the next thing, right? And it's incredibly hard to raise that money. It costs a lot of money to raise that money. But if we can sell you things like high quality clothing, we're moving towards also making just like normal shit, not meme products, not, meme shirts and whatnot. So for example, this hat just says Saint Javelin on it, right? That kind of stuff. So you can have a shirt that just says Saint Javelin, and that by buying that shirt, which is very high quality shirt, it's made in Ukraine, comparable to, I don't know, like a Nike shirt or Patagonia or whatever, right? You buy that, a large percentage of the money that you paid for that shirt goes back to Ukrainian organizations, and then they do their thing, and we can kind of alleviate that fundraising role from them, right? So I think that if we can continue to do that and find something sustainable that way, I don't know if it's like, maybe it becomes coffee, or maybe it becomes something like that. Like Black Rifle Coffee Company in the US is massive, right? And they work with veterans, or they give back to veterans. That's their thing, and they grew a massive company from that. So if we can do anything like that, I think it'd be an amazing thing to do. So
now,
that's all I'm trying to go for.
I saw that somebody ripped off your name and tried to make a vodka. Where are you at with that? That pissed me off, man.
Yeah, it pissed me off too, because it came from a conversation. So those people were introduced to us by a charity, and it was positioned as like, hey, they just want to work with you or whatever. At that time, they'd already gone behind our back and registered the trademark under alcohol for Saint Javelin, which, if I'd known, I never even would have started a conversation with them. But at that point, I had I was so busy at that point that I had no intention or ability to even entertain a conversation about alcohol. And I wasn't sure if it was even something that Saint Javelin would ever want to get into. Right. So I just kind of put it off. And then eventually we have a couple lawyers that we work with in Kyiv, because we set up a corporation there and whatever. And they told me that, they messaged me one day and they were like, hey, did you know somebody has your trademark in the US for alcohol? And that's when I found out that it was that company that tried to leverage us to help them with whatever they were doing. So
quality humans there.
Yeah. Well, they said that they were going to donate like $50,000 or something like that, which to me, you could do that anyways. Why do you have to try to take our trademark? Right. So that's what I really didn't like about that deal. But I see so many ripoffs on Amazon and Etsy and all that sort of stuff. But we've built a brand that people recognize as the official Saint Javelin brand. So I know we still get tons of messages and pictures of people who wear the knockoff stuff, and it's very easy for us to tell what's a knockoff and what isn't. But it is what it is. Like, we don't have the bandwidth to be able to pursue all those knockoffs. So it's just a reality of getting so much attention, I guess.
Now, for all the people abroad that want to help, what avenues besides picking up merch at Saint Javelin, if people want to help, what are the best ways that they can get involved? What are other organizations that you recognize as being impactful on the ground in Ukraine? You'll have a better sense than most.
Yeah. So if you want to make an impact militarily, the best organization is Come Back Alive. They've been around for a very long time now, and they have they are the most respected organization in Ukraine when it comes to supplying the military with what the military needs. We've had several conversations with them, and they are as legit as it comes. If you wanted to, humanitarian efforts wise, we send our money to Ukrainian World Congress, and they do a litany of different things. They've been raising money for drones. They've put over $25 million, I think, right now, of equipment and aid into the country. They've helped with tons and tons of different things, but like first aid kits. Genuinely, right now, I think what people should be planning for is to help Ukrainians through the winter, because probably what will happen is Russia will just try to freeze the continent as much as they feasibly can. So people are already planning for what does that look like for civilians, for members of the military. How do they get through if there's literally no way to heat, right? So we're definitely going to make toques or beanies, socks, gloves, and balaclavas. And then, so we're going to make those in Canada, and then we're going to sell them to our audience. And then when you buy one, we're going to make another one in Ukraine and donate it to the military. So it'll be kind of like that Tom's Shoes model.
Beautiful.
So, so we're going to do that. But I think we even have it on our website, but there's a lot of different organizations that you can reach out to.
Is Rosm one of them?
Yeah, Rosm is one of the biggest ones in the U.S., I think. Help Us Help, if you wanted to specifically help kids in Ukraine. All of these different organizations, like you can trust that they'll do the right thing with your money, right? And they work extremely. I know that they work extremely hard, and it's a very difficult thing that they do.
You know, one thing that's interesting, especially that I've learned through your account, is how high tech war has become. What weapons in Ukrainians' possession do you feel have made the biggest impact and have been game changers throughout this war?
I think HIMARS is the one that sticks out the most right now, because the Ukrainians were completely outmatched in terms of artillery. So the Russians were able to just, for every, say the Ukrainians fired 10 shells, the Russians had 100 to fire, right? So they could just coat the Ukrainians with artillery, which is the most devastating thing that you can ever imagine. It's just horror. So what HIMARS allowed the Ukrainians to do is to basically attack all of these ammo depots that are way behind Russian front lines, where Ukrainians didn't have the capability to get to those and accurately strike them. So now that they do, they're able to hit their ammo depots, blow up their ammo depots where they're storing all this ammunition, all these artillery shells, and essentially what they've done is they've narrowed that gap. If it was 10 to 100, now it's like 10 to 20 or whatever, right? Or maybe even 10 to 10. I don't know.
They go
exactly,
like 70 kilometers or something like that.
Yeah, it goes like 70 kilometers, and it gives them the ability to just remove all that superiority from the equation. And I think that has been the biggest thing to halt any sort of Russian advance. Now, if the Ukrainians are going to try counteroffensives, they're going to need probably a lot more.
Do you feel like the tide is turning?
Yeah, for sure. I think that the Russians are, from all accounts, and these are people who just follow the war every day. They're saying that the Russians are now digging in. So they're basically stopping their advances because they can't advance further, and they're digging in preparation for counteroffensives. And the Ukrainians are now hitting bridges and stuff like that to ensure that they can cut off supply lines for the Russians. So almost basically, encircling them, right? And making sure that they can just trap them and keep them in an area where they can't get more support and whatever, so that they can hopefully take back areas like Kherson and whatnot in the south. So I think that that's probably what they're going to try to start to do. But I think the reality is this war is just going to be a very, very long war, unfortunately.
What do you hope that people abroad have learned about the people of the Ukraine?
I just hope that people understand that Ukraine is a country full of people who want to be part of the West, who have paid this unbelievable price to be part of this thing that we all take for granted, right? And yeah, I think that's the only thing that I guess I would say, that I would hope that people understand that difference now.
There still are these people in the West that feel like this is some NATO-driven thing, that this isn't ingrained in Ukrainians, that they want their independence, that they want their own country, and that they should be allowed to join the EU and prosper and not be under some Russian grip. Do you think that, what do you think it's going to take to dispel this notion that, this was caused by some war game from the West?
I guess I have a different perspective on it because I live in a bubble of, watching this every day. So I would hope that people don't think that this is about NATO anymore, and that it's people who think that this is NATO's fault. This is not about NATO. This is about Russia saying, you are part of us, and how dare you try to be something else. And it is basically punishment for trying to be not in their orbit and not Russian. And it literally can't be overestimated. It is genocide. If the Russians had been able to do what they wanted to do, they would have killed off a significant portion of the Ukrainian population. They put them through filtration camps. They destroyed Mariupol. They didn't care who they were killing. They bombed hospitals. They did all these things, right? If they were able to do what they wanted to do, it would have been much, much, much worse. So this was never about NATO or Ukraine joining NATO. It was just Ukraine being able to set its own direction that pissed Russia off. And it's very hard for people to understand that it would piss anybody off that much. But you have to understand where the Kremlin leadership comes from, right? They are people who come from the KGB, which stems from, it stems from the most horrific things that the Soviet Union did. So you can never understand their mentality and how they think of things, because they think of things as an empire, right? And they don't think of humans as whatever, as just individuals. Everything is about like a larger game at play, right? So it's just very hard for people to understand why this all happened, but it's definitely not because of anything NATO did.
What do you think the biggest thing to end this is? Is it through dissent within Russia? Is it economics? What is it going to take, or should we just buckle down for a long haul here?
I think if somebody just shot Putin, a lot of things would change. But I also don't know, right? I don't know if that would be enough. Honestly, I thought that the oligarch class, the upper class in Russia, wouldn't let it get this far, but they clearly don't have the power to stop it. They've obviously lost tons of money through this, right? And unfortunately, a lot of them are still able to travel in the West, and their kids still go to schools in the West and stuff like that. But I think if you cut off the money supply completely, and if you inflict as much military damage as you possibly can so that Russia can't continue, that is realistically the only thing that you can do to force them to stop. Unfortunately, they don't reason or use logic, right? Logically, there's no path for them to win this war strategically. They can still make maybe tactical advances and take small towns and stuff like that, but they cannot win this war with Ukraine. But they haven't got that through their heads. And the only way that can happen, it seems, is if you just make it impossible for them to wage war anymore. So that's why, quite honestly, people think that sending weapons to Ukraine prolongs the war. It actually just shortens the war, because if you give Ukraine enough weapons to do what they need to do, you'll end this war very, very quickly.
Wow. Well, I know you're a busy man. Thank you for taking the time. You have important work to do, and I appreciate you coming on the Rebel Road Show. So I hope we can have you back on when Ukraine does its victory dance after they kick them the hell out.
Thanks a lot, man. We just started planning a party in Crimea for next summer, so hopefully we can make that happen.
Your trolling level is top notch.
I think now that we have all of these people who are all going in the same direction, and everybody's like very excited about what we're doing, it makes it a lot easier.
Don't quit this fight, because they need you.
Thanks a lot, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.